All right, good morning, grade 12s. Welcome back. I have not seen you last week. I missed you. Good to see you all back. Guys, just a reminder, no one is allowed to leave the venue as soon as the lesson starts. And guys, please remove headsets, earpods, whatever, so that you can concentrate and focus on the lesson. So today we are going to start with Life of Pi. So for the next 3 weeks, we're just going to focus on Life of Pi. All right, so turn your attention to our notes. We're going to start with setting. But before I begin, and I'm going to constantly remind you of this line. You're actually going to get tired of hearing me say this, right? When you hear that this story is about a 16-year-old boy who survives on a lifeboat for how many days? 227 days on a lifeboat. And what do we throw into the mix? With a Bengal tiger. Does that story sound believable to you? No. So from the very onset, Patel, he has to employ various tools to convince us that this story can actually happen. So we're going to go through different aspects, and by the end of it, he tries to convince you that there is a possibility that this story could happen. So first of all, setting is important. We know that part 1 is set in Pondicherry, which was actually renamed Pondicherry, which is, now most of India, like most countries in the world, was colonized by the British. However, this southern part of India was colonized by the French. So you'll notice, you remember his name, he was even named after a French pool, swimming pool. So we see lots of French elements, but there was actually, and another part that I want you to take note of, there's always this close mix between fact and fiction. Now, you know there's a fine line between fact and fiction. Are we clear about that? Like if you think about, let's say, Jeffrey Dahmer, right? Now, you know he really existed. Were there movies made about him? Yes. And even after that movie, there were people who copied what was done in movies. Have you seen that, right? When you see things on Instagram, that's the lifestyle we see that they portray to us. It's not totally real. It is what they want us to see. So this idea in Life of Pi about the fine line between fact and fiction. So Patel, he throws in lots of fact, but there's also fiction in there. So we start to believe the facts, and that's why we start to accept that the story could have happened. Right, so here there is a so first of all, you have a fictitious, now you have a zoo, right? And in India, if you go there, there is a Pondicherry Zoo. But it doesn't have those diverse species of animals as seen in Life of Pi. But can you see where he takes a bit of reality? Yes, there is this exact zoo in India, but it doesn't have those same animals. So so remember, does Life of Pi continue chronologically? No, it doesn't start at the beginning, young Pi. It starts with adult Pi. So right from the onset, we know that Pi survived the ordeal, right? But this back and forth thing is what confuses us. So we're just going to put it into parts. Part 1, India. And then part 2, the Pacific Ocean. Now, remember I started with, is it easy for us to believe that a boy is stranded on a lifeboat with a Bengal tiger? It's not easy for us. What should be a question that crosses your mind? How did the Bengal tiger end up on a lifeboat? I mean, it's a tiger. So he has to strategically create a situation for a boy and a tiger to be alone at sea. And I'm going to show you how he does that. So part 1, India. Part 2, Pacific Ocean. Part 3 is in Mexico. And in part 3, we actually find part 1 and part 2 coming together, where everything is now explained to us in part 3. And we know that it doesn't just end in Mexico, because after that, where does Pi end up? In which country? Canada. Why does he not go back to India? He's got nothing left in India to go back to. All right, so are we fine with the setting? Now, in your notes, I know it shows you the plot, But I think it makes more sense for us to go to characters. So can you please go to the character section? We'll go through our characters, and then we'll come back to the plot. But before that, I want to talk about, and in one of the past papers, the question was, why did Pi's father decide to leave India? I mean, they grew up in India, they've been in India their entire life, they have a well-established zoo in India. Why did Pi's father decide to leave India? And this is the reason, so please take note. The Prime Minister at that time, her name was Indira Gandhi, but she was somewhat of a dictator. So anybody who opposed her, they were imprisoned, and she believed in nationalizing. Now, what does nationalizing mean? It means that the government will take over your property. If you own something, the government will just pay you a small amount and they'll take it over. So Pi's father feared that Miss Indira Gandhi, because she was such a dictator, she would at some time take over his zoo. And before that happens, he decided that him and his family would leave India. Now, when you think about it, if they sold the zoo, which they did, they sold the zoo and they sold some of the animals in India. Why do you think they took the rest of the animals? Now remember, Bengal tigers, we find them in India. Bengal is a place in India, right? So you find many Bengal tigers there. But if I have to take a Bengal tiger to America or Canada to sell that tiger, wouldn't I get more money there? So that's the reason. So Pi's father identifies a few animals that he decides he'll actually get more money if he sells those animals either in America or in Canada rather than selling it in India. So that's how the animals ended up on the cargo ship. And please take note, Pi and his family did not go on a passenger liner. This is also important. They went on a cargo ship. Now, what's important about that? The fact that it was a cargo ship versus a passenger liner. Why did so many people on the Titanic, you know the Titanic on the maiden voyage, their very first voyage, that's when the Titanic sank, right? And you know they always, I think it was the captain. Do you know what the captain said about the Titanic? Even God can't sink the ship. And on the very first voyage, that ship sank. But why did so many people die? Because they had more than enough time to get out of the ship. Because there were not enough lifeboats. They were so convinced that that ship won't sink that they didn't even put enough lifeboats. So here in Life of Pi, likewise, it's a cargo ship. So are they going to have many lifeboats? No, because they just need enough for the crew. It wasn't very often that a family and obviously the whole lot of animals would be on this boat. Are we all clear? So Jan Patel takes a lot of time and effort to make us believe that this story is actually plausible, right? Believable. So that's how each thing that he does brings us closer to the understanding that perhaps this tiger was on the lifeboat. Are we fine with everything that I just said? All right, let's continue. Let's go through our characters. Pasin Molita Patel. So obviously he is our narrator and he is our protagonist. He's the main character. He is the son of a zookeeper. Is that significant? Yes, it is, because from the time Pi was a little child, he grew up in the zoo. So he would have knowledge of animal behavior. Would that help him later on? Yes, in the Pacific Ocean on the lifeboat, he has knowledge that will help him to survive. He'll know how to interact with animals. And then we realize, now, with Life of Pi, there are many complexities that we find. First of all, you know that we have young Pi, teenage Pi. So young Pi, basically everything that we speak about in India is young Pi. Teenage Pi, the Pi that's stranded on the Pacific Ocean. And adult Pi, the Pi that's now in Canada, right? So teenage Pi, he renames himself Pi. Do you remember why he renames himself Pi? Because if you pronounce his name, it's Pasing. Pasing Patel. Now imagine as a teenager, your name is Pasing. You're just asking for people to make fun of you. So he realized, I don't want this. So when he goes to high school, immediately, and like you are in grade 12, you know that if you need to remember something, repetition is key. So this whole thing about but we're going to talk about his name later, so I'm not going to focus too much on that. He practices 3 religions: Hinduism, Christianity, and Islam. Now, I think this is another important point for us to consider. You realize that Pai's parents, he comes from a Hindu family, right? But his parents are not practicing Hindus. So they do not go to a Hindu temple at all. It is actually his aunt who took him to a temple. So the first thing, do you think that is important? Yes, it is. Now, another thing that we know about Hinduism, if you know much about Hinduism, you would realize that in the Hindu religion, there are several gods that they worship, right? Now, just bear that in mind. Think about Christianity. In Christianity, do we have many gods? No, it's very much you worship one God, only one God. Islam is the same. You worship Allah alone. Now, think about it. If Pai started out as a Christian, where he was told that there's only one God, would it have been easy for him to accept many religions? No. But now, if you were brought up in a Hindu home where you see that several gods are presented to you, don't you think it's more likely that you could just accept the Christian God as just another one of your gods, and then the Muslim God as another one? Do you understand? So Jan Patel, he's very strategic about everything that he does. So we know that he practices 3 religions. And obviously, would we find this strange for a young child? Yes. Most children don't even want to go to church. Now imagine here you have this child who doesn't want one religion, but he wants, and the setting of India. India is a very diverse country where there are several languages that are spoken, there are several religions that are practiced. Remember, Buddhism as well is practiced in India. So there's several religions. It's a very diverse country. And when we speak about the plot, we'll talk about why India? Why did he choose India? So Pai has faith and knowledge in, please highlight, he has knowledge of animal psychology, and that is essential for his survival. We know that survival is an important theme. So every time we mention something, I would like you to link it to a theme. So we know now survival is an essential theme. And then what does he study as an adult? Zoology and theology, religion, theology. So do you think what happened on the lifeboat or his younger years actually influenced him? Yes, because even as an adult, we see that he still clings to these 2 parts. Then let's move on to Richard Parker. Richard Parker is a 3-year-old Bengal tiger. And he is Pai's only companion. He was captured as a cub and he was taken to Pondicherry Zoo. And he is actually Pai's nemesis. Now, what is nemesis? Your rival. But does that situation change later? Yes, because they start to coexist perfectly. So initially, Pai sees Richard Parker as a nemesis. I need to get rid of him because he's a threat. And Pai has a whole list of plans that he goes through about how he's going to get rid of Richard Parker. But in the end, he realizes, I actually need Richard Parker. All right. So let's talk about the name Richard Parker. If you have a pet, most of us do not give our pet a name and a surname, am I correct? So when you hear the name Richard Parker, we think of more as a human being, right? So how did he get the name Richard Parker? It was actually a clerical error. So on the paperwork, the hunter's name was Richard Parker, and Richard Parker, the tiger's name, was Thirsty. Now, who can tell me, how did he get the name Thirsty? So this was a question in a past paper. Listen carefully. When they captured Richard Parker as a cub, he was at the stream and they tried to lure him with meat. I think it was a young goat. They tried to get his attention with that. But Richard Parker, we're going to call him Richard Parker, but at that time he was just a cub. He was more interested in drinking water. He was so thirsty that he focused on the water rather than the meat. And they found that so funny, so that's why they called him Thirsty. Are we all clear? Now, this book is 100 chapters. They could select an extract from anywhere. Guys, another thing I want to tell you about, the audio of Life of Pi. Now, the audio is 10 hours, right? I use, listen to me. I use the audio when I read with my learners. The audio goes much faster. It's 100 chapters. If you have to read this novel, it takes you forever, right? But if you have this audio on your phone, but you must be sitting with your novel as well, and you're following your novel and you listen, just listen for 1 hour a day. And then in your July holiday, you know that you have to read Life of Pi for the second time on your own. You need to do it before you write your exam. And if we can get that audio to all of you, it will really benefit you, right? So remember, it's actually just 10 days, 10 hours, and you will be done with the 100 chapters. I'll tell you about the audio, about how we're going to give it to you. Right, so part 3. In part 3, when the Japanese officials interview Pi, we come to the realization that Richard Parker is actually Pi's alter ego. What do we understand by alter ego? If I say you have an alter ego, do any of you have an alter ego? No. Okay, so all of you are exactly the same. I'm going to remind you of this. Today, let me remind you how different you are. So tonight, I don't know what your plans are for tonight, but wherever you are with, however you are dressed, however you speak, is it going to be the same tomorrow when you attend church? I hope you attend church, Mother's Day and everything. Would it be the same, or does it change a little? It changes a little. That's your alter ego. All right. Think of Beyonce. What's Beyonce's alter ego? Sasha Fierce. Because sometimes, learners, listen. Sometimes we have to take on another persona in order for us to achieve what we need to achieve. Now, Pi needed to take on the alter ego of Richard Parker. He needed to become Richard Parker in order to survive. Never forget, Pi is a 16-year-old, and please note, he's a vegetarian. 16-year-old vegetarian boy who practices 3 religions. Can you see the innocence that's associated with Pi? And then later we realized, if Pi is capable of doing some of the things that he does, imagine what the rest of us are capable of. Here's a deeply religious vegetarian boy who resorts to some things that are actually quite gruesome. But we'll talk about that as we continue. Now, let's meet our next character, our fictional author, the narrator. So, please take note of this. In Life of Pi, we have layers of narration. So you have, who's our first narrator? Pi. And who's our second narrator? The fictional author. And learners, please, when you write, I don't want you to say the author, because the author of Life of Pi is Jan Patel. You will say the fictional author, because the fictional author is actually a character in our story. He is created by Jan Patel, but he's a part of our story. So every time you mention a fictional author, you mention it as fictional author, not just author. So he interviews Pi. What is the reason for the interview? And you notice that Life of Pi starts with what? The author's note. You notice most novels that you read, do they have an author's note? No, most novels will not. You do have isolated novels that would have an author's note, but by far the majority do not have an author's note. Now, what is important about this? It adds authenticity. Highlight that. The whole point is Jan Patel wants us to believe the story. So he shows us that the fictional author actually goes to Canada, he's sitting there, and he's actually interviewing Pi. Now, if you had to tell my life story, would it be as meaningful as if I told my life story? No, it wouldn't. But if you hear the story directly from me, it would add authenticity because I was there, I experienced everything that I'm saying, right? So remember, you remember what I started with? Jan Patel needs to convince us that this is true. And one of the strategies that he uses is creating this fictional author who's constantly interviewing Pi. So you'll see when we read, there's something going on, and the next thing, and whenever you see italics, that is our fictional author, right? So when you get an extract in the exam, if you see italics, instantly you know our narrator is fictional author. If it's normal script, then you know that it's Pi narrating his story. So it's to convince us that this is not just a made-up story. It did happen. Then you have Santosh Patel. Who is Santosh Patel? Pi's father. I want you to take note of this, that he ran a large hotel in Madras. Is this significant? Yes, because in the novel, they tell us that Pi's father and Pi see a zoo as a kind of hotel. Right? Think about it. Animals have their cages in a hotel. People have their rooms. After you leave, is it cleaned up? Yes, a hotel has to be cleaned up after you leave. Those cages where those animals live in, they have to be cleaned up. So do you understand? He sees this whole hotel keeping. There's an entire chapter, I think, where they speak about the hotel keeping and comparing it to both. So now he owns the Pondicherry Zoo. He teaches Pi about animal behavior. Do you remember that incident? It's a memorable incident where, what is the name of that tiger? You remember? Pi and his brother Ravi. They are together, and Pi's mother and father, Pi's mother is actually very upset with the father for doing this. But the father takes Pi because he feels that Pi is a bit too comfortable. Now remember, a tiger is a wild animal. That tiger can kill you in a matter of seconds. And he realized that Pi is becoming a bit too comfortable with animals. So he needed Pi to learn a valuable lesson. So he takes Pi and Ravi to the cage of an animal, of a tiger that hasn't eaten for 3 days. What is the name of that tiger? Because most learners think that the only tiger that we have here is Richard Parker. So that tiger's name is Mahisha, right? Mahisha. And then he teaches Pi a lesson with this goat that he feeds to the tiger. So it's a live goat, and you see how this tiger just devours the goat. Pi, of course, is quite traumatized. It is traumatizing for a child to see this. And Pi's father, Santosh Patel, he dies during the sinking of the Sum Sum. Then you have Geeta Patel, Pi's mother. The thing that I want you to take note of her, she reads widely. Does Pi have a love of reading? Yes, he does. Is that important? For which theme? The theme of storytelling. Guys, take note of this. So Pi's mother she reads widely. Pi develops this love of reading from his mother. Does it contribute to his survival? Yes, because he's so widely read, he's very knowledgeable. And when he's alone on that lifeboat, he can remember all these stories that he read. Remember, being alone on a lifeboat can drive you to insanity. So that actually contributed to his survival. So I want you learners to note that several of our themes are going to overlap. Survival, storytelling, religion, constantly will be overlapping. So you must draw, and when you answer your questions, try to draw in those themes. We're going to discuss themes on, I think, next week or the third week. So she's really not interested in religion. And in the human story, she is orange juice, the orangutan. In the human story, she represents orange juice, the orangutan. Right, so far, are we fine with all these characters? Okay, let's continue. Ravi is Pi's older brother, and he is the captain of the cricket team. Now, in India, there's only two things that matter: cricket and Bollywood movies. If you belong to either, you are considered above everybody else. So now, Ravi, and think about this. You know, older brothers and younger siblings are constantly fighting. Ravi constantly teased Pi. He teased him because of the fact that he practices the three religions. Then you have Francis Adiburasamy. You are going to call him Mama G. And guys, please listen. I have marked so many papers where people write Mama, M-A-M-A, and G, Mama G. It is not spelt like that, right? So G is actually a sign of respect. Is Mama G Pi's biological uncle? No, he's just a family friend. But what we know about him is that he is an excellent swimmer. And he teaches Pi how to swim. Now, I want you, the fictional author, when he goes to India, who does he meet? He meets Mama G. And please highlight that shaded blue line. Mama G tells him, I will tell you a story that will make you believe in God. Now, guys, I'm going to ask you this exact line in the next 2 weeks. I'm going to refer to the same line again. I am going to tell you a story that will make you believe in God. Why will this story make you believe in God? Why will the story of life of Pi make someone who reads it believe in God? Can anyone answer that for me? Okay. Is it easy for us to believe in a God we do not see? Is it easy? We do it, but is it easy? No, it isn't. It takes some faith for us to believe in God. Am I correct? Is it easy for us to believe that a boy, a 16-year-old boy, can survive for 227 days on a lifeboat with a Bengal tiger? No. So he tries to tell us that if we can believe this story, then you can easily believe in God. Do you understand the concept? Right. And he is the one who gives Pi the name Pasin Molata. Sitaram is not important. He's just a worker at the zoo. Then you have Satish Kumar, the biology teacher. Very important. What do we know? We know that you have two Satish Kumars, right? Is that by coincidence? No, it's very, very deliberate. So the first one, Pi's teacher at school, what subject? Biology. So guys, when you are answering, I want you to say Satish Kumar, in brackets, biology teacher. And he's actually an atheist, right? Because he believes when he was young, he had polio. He says it was science that cured him, not God. And he inspires Pi later as an adult to study zoology. He's an active communist. You know, communists do not believe in religion. Any communist country? Now, which theme will this be linking to? Science and religion. Science and religion, another theme, right? So when we're talking about science and religion, you're going to definitely talk about both our Satish Kumars. Let's go to the other Satish Kumar. So when you talk about Satish Kumar, the baker, you put in brackets the baker, and he's the person who introduces Pi to Islam. And obviously, he inspires Pi to study religion. Then you have Father Martin. Father Martin, guys, you are distracting others that are actually trying to listen. So please, the Catholic priest. He is the one who introduces Pi to Christianity. And what is the thing about Christianity that draws Pi in? It's about this concept of love. That Jesus loved us so much, that God loved us so much that he was willing to sacrifice his son to forgive our sins. So he loves this idea of this concept of love, and he's drawn to that. And when he sees this idea of this Christian God, he realizes, but I also want to become Christian. And after he becomes Christian, the next religion that he follows is Islam. He becomes Muslim as well. Now, the hyena, just to refresh your memory, in the human story, the hyena is actually the French cook. The zebra is the Taiwanese sailor. The orangutan is Pi's mother. And Richard Parker is Pi himself. The one thing I want you to do, even if you do not plan to read the entire novel of Life of Pi, guys, you need to go back and read the human story. Most learners know the animal story pretty well, but the human story is just a few pages. I'll tell you exactly, it's chapter 99. I'll tell you exactly which pages you need to read for the human story, but we are going to go through the human story in detail as well. Then you have Tomohiro Okamoto. He's from the Japanese Ministry of Transport. Why does he come to Mexico? To interview Pi. Remember, there was a huge Japanese cargo ship that sinks. They have to do an investigation. So when he hears the story, Pi tells him the animal story. What does he say? We don't believe your story. Give us another story. And then Pi gives them the human story. And what do they say? We prefer the animal story. Why do they prefer the animal story? In the animal story, animals do terrible things. In the human story, humans do terrible things. Do we like to acknowledge that we, as human beings, are capable of such gruesomeness? No. It's easier, it makes us feel better to say that an animal did something, but not us, because we are civilized human beings. Do you understand? So it was easier for us to distance ourselves from what human beings are actually capable of. Then you have Okamoto, he's the junior colleague, and he sees, when Pi tells them the human story, he sees the similarity between the human story and the animal story. You know that they're never going to ask you which is the correct story. But they could ask you to motivate which story you believe. Do you believe the animal story, or do you believe the human story? Either is correct. It depends on what your reasoning is. And then you have Pi's family. You have Meena Patel, Pi's wife. You have Nikhil, who's Pi's son. Usha is Pi's daughter. And Auntie G is, when Pi goes to Canada, she's his foster mother. So this is Pi's family in Canada. Right. Now, guys, we're really not going to have time to do a detailed study of the plot, but it is a fantastical story about a 16-year-old boy who survives. Yes, we're going back to now the plot. 227 days. We know that his father runs a zoo. Please highlight that at 15, he actually starts practicing Hinduism, Islam, and Christianity. And at 16 is when they decide to leave India. At 16, they leave India. Pi's, guys, if you look at the time, we don't have enough time, right? Pi's mother, father, brother, the entire family, they die when the ship sinks, and he is the only survivor. But on the lifeboat, we have a hyena, a zebra, you have Orange Juice, the orangutan, and Richard Parker, the tiger. Important. The hyena kills the zebra. Now, you know that Pi loves animals. And when he refers to the other animals, he calls them he or she. And when he talks about the hyena, he refers to the hyena as it. Because from the onset, he describes the hyena as something that's disgusting. And he hates the hyena, and you'll see why, right? And the hyena kills the zebra and Orange Juice, but it is Richard Parker who actually kills the hyena. Now, I know many of you watched the movie. Guys, it is not film study. There are differences between the movie and the novel, and you know people are very visual. You're going to remember what you watched rather than what you read. So you really need to read Life of Pi again. Okay, so Pi is alone on the lifeboat with the adult. What's some of the things that you need to realize about Pi? On the lifeboat is the tiger. In the ocean, there are sharks. So he has to choose. Am I going to stay on this lifeboat with this tiger, or do I face the sharks? So those are the decisions. So he decides he can't be on the lifeboat because that tiger will kill him. He can't be in the ocean because the sharks will kill him. So he makes a raft. How does he make a raft? He uses anything that can float. The life jacket, the oars, the buoy, everything. He ties them up together and then he tugs it. He ties it to the lifeboat. Remember, if he just leaves this little raft, it will drift away. So he needs it to be linked to the lifeboat because he knows that his plan later is to get back onto the lifeboat, which is important, right? And he knows that he must tame a tiger. Would we be capable of just taming a tiger? No, but it's his knowledge. Remember, he grew up at a zoo, so he has more knowledge of animal behavior, animal psychology. And what does he use to tame the tiger? Whistle, a turtle shell. He uses a giant turtle shell as kind of a shield, and he delineates his own territory. How does he do that? When he says, this is my territory. So another theme in Life of Pi, territory, boundaries. Territory and boundaries are an important theme of Life of Pi. How do I mark my territory? How does your dog mark its territory? And I do not want you to use the word pee. I want you to say, English home language learners, urinates. All right, to demarcate his area. While at sea, Pi and Richard Parker face many challenges. Remember, what are some of the challenges? They don't have enough food. He's a vegetarian boy. Can he be picky and choosy about what he eats? Can he say that I have to restrict myself to my vegetarian diet? No. And then there's constant exposure to elements. The sun, exposure to the sun. You'll see at the end, Pi is practically naked because his clothes disintegrate, right? He has to face severe storms. Think about, imagine being in the middle of an ocean and it's a lightning storm. Do you know how terrifying that is? But Pi doesn't see it like that. Pi sees it as God is still around. God is still with me, right? So Pi manages to capture and kill a bird, a turtle. Pi even kills a mako shark. And this is coming from a boy. I want you, when you read, take note of the first time he catches a fish. He feels so bad to kill that fish, he actually covers the head so that fish is not looking at him, right? And later, he starts to decide, when I kill a fish, I'm going to stick something through its eye because then I can save more meat. And then he says, people, human beings, can get used to anything, even killing. Only the first time is difficult. That shows us that we are capable of great evil. Just put in a situation, right? So if we had to go on some trip together, all of us had to go on a trip, and our plane crashes, you know that we're going to start eating each other. Yes, we are. Is there anyone who will not be eating another human being? Right, then we will start eating you guys first. Thanks. Right. Okay, guys, let's continue. During a severe period of starvation, now remember, Pi will go for days without eating food, right? Now you think about it. Some of the times, if you skip one meal, you are starving, you can't even concentrate in school. Pi had to go sometimes for days or weeks without food, and this is what happens. You remember there's a time where Pi and Richard Parker are both blind. What causes both of them to become blind? Please highlight dehydration and malnutrition. Please highlight what causes them to be blind? Dehydration, malnutrition. And while Pi is on this boat, he hears a voice. And then he thinks that he's hallucinating. He thinks that it's Richard Parker speaking to him. But it's actually the blind Frenchman. And this blind Frenchman, he says, I'm so happy to see you. He hears the French accent. He wants to come onto Pi's boat. Does he want to come onto the boat for companionship? What's his intention? And remember, he's also blind, probably for the same reason, dehydration and malnutrition. He wants to eat Pi. Pi is so happy that he's going to get a companion. He says, yes, come on board. And then he's about to tell him, but there is a, He doesn't even finish his sentence because as soon as the blind Frenchman comes on board, Richard Parker attacks him. Why? Because he comes into Richard Parker's territory. Animals, if you go into their territory, they see it as a threat. So Richard Parker, without any consideration, he pounces on the man and he kills. But remember, now you know we said that they coexist. Richard Parker and Pi coexist. Do you realize that Richard Parker at this point saves Pi's life? Does Pi save Richard Parker? Yes, by providing food and clean water. So that is why we say that they coexist. They need each other for survival. All right, the tiger kills him, Pi is saved. But please take note, that is the beginning of Pi's true moral suffering, because he realizes that he is responsible for the death of another human being. So true moral suffering starts at that time. And then you know they come across this island. It's known as Algae Island. It's actually protruding algae that protrudes and roots from the bottom. There's no soil, there's no ground, but you have this island. And on the island, there's meerkats, there's bathing water, there's drinking water, but they never stay at night on the island. And Richard Parker is very hesitant. Even when they get to the island, he doesn't want to just jump out. So we know there's something weird about this island. And Pi eventually decides that he's going to, at first, remember Pi is in the lifeboat for 227 days. So his muscles don't work. He has to learn how to walk again to get his strength. And on the island basically has everything that they need. But at night, the surface emits acid. And everything that's on the ground will eventually dissolve, right? And then when they realize this, Pi leaves the island. We're going to speak about the island in detail later. When they leave the island, he takes Richard Parker with him. He could have left Richard Parker, but he takes Richard Parker because he knows that he needs Richard Parker for survival. Richard Parker needs him for survival. When they get, so you know that nobody saves Pi. He ends up on a Mexican beach, and that's how he's rescued. When they get there, what does Richard Parker do? He just walks off, and Pi is so upset because Richard Parker walks off, doesn't even turn back to say goodbye to him, right? And then he disappears. Pi is taken to a hospital. That's where the two Japanese officials come to investigate the sinking of the Sum Sum, and when they tell the animal story and the human story. And constantly, we are interrupted with the author's note. While recovering in Mexico, he recovers completely. He gets an insurance because of the sinking of the Sum Sum. That's the name of the ship. He gets an insurance, and he decides that he's not going back to India. He has nothing left in India, and he returns to Canada. He finishes high school. He studies zoology and religion theology at the university. At some point, he gets married. He has 2 children. Does he ever forget about Richard Parker? No. Even adult Pi has a little orange cat that reminds him of Richard Parker. Okay, we are not going to go through this question, but you have it with you. But we'll speak about it maybe next week. I'd like to go through this with you. But the thought for the week: average will not be my legacy. You are worth much more. Right. Have a great week, guys.